You live inside a system that rewards scale, punishes outsiders, and quietly limits your choices. Most people think this system just happened, driven by technology or globalization. It did not. It was designed deliberately by a man who lived more than a century ago. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and his company was Standard Oil. By the early 1900s, his methods shaped how industries consolidate, how governments regulate, and how power concentrates. This story is not about one monopoly, it is about a blueprint that never went away. Welcome to Global Insight. Here is the central paradox. The same system that made oil cheaper, energy reliable, and growth predictable also made competition fragile and power permanent. It was built in the United States, under laws written by state legislatures in Ohio and New Jersey in the late 19th century. It was tolerated by presidents from Grover Cleveland to William McKinley because it delivered stability, and once it worked, it became impossible to unlearn. By the end of this video, you will understand how one man's legal and economic design outlived his company. You will see how Rockefeller's structure survived the 1911 Supreme Court ruling under Chief Justice Edward Douglas White. You will recognize the same logic inside modern corporations, regulators, and foundations. You will know why breaking up a giant rarely breaks the system behind it. And you will understand why this matters far beyond oil. In the 1850s, oil was not an empire, it was a gamble. Edwin Drake drilled the first successful oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, in 1859. Kerosene quickly replaced whale oil for lighting in American cities. Demand surged before rules, infrastructure, or standards existed. Chaos came before order. John D. Rockefeller entered this chaos in Cleveland, Ohio, in the early 1860s. He was not a wildcatter drilling wells, he was a bookkeeper, refining crude into usable fuel. Refining was messy, dangerous, and unstable, with prices swinging violently. Rockefeller focused on control, predictability, and cost discipline. That choice defined everything that followed. Railroads were the first leverage point. Companies like the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad needed steady bulk shippers. Rockefeller negotiated secret rebates and preferential rates by guaranteeing volume. Smaller refiners paid more to ship the same oil. Transportation quietly became a weapon. By 1870, Rockefeller and his partners formally created Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Ohio law limited how corporations could operate across state lines. Rockefeller worked within those limits while pushing them to their edge. Expansion required legal creativity, not just capital. This was a legal problem before it was an economic one. Horizontal consolidation came next. Standard Oil acquired or crushed rival refineries in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York. Competitors were offered buyouts or price wars they could not survive. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of American refining capacity. Market dominance arrived before regulation did. Vertical integration followed immediately. Standard Oil moved into pipelines, barrel manufacturing, storage tanks, and export terminals. Each step reduced dependence on outsiders and lowered internal costs. Control replaced negotiation at every stage. Efficiency was real and measurable. This strategy made sense in its time. The United States government under Presidents Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes favored industrial growth. There was no federal antitrust law until 1890. State governments competed to attract large corporations. Scale was seen as progress. Rockefeller did not invent consolidation, but he perfected it. He understood that stability creates political tolerance. He understood that legality depends on structure, not intent. By the 1880s, Standard Oil was no longer just a company. It was a system waiting to be formalized. The key mechanism was not size alone, it was coordination. In 1882, Rockefeller and his lawyers created the Standard Oil Trust. The trust placed shares of dozens of companies under a single board of trustees. Control was centralized, while ownership appeared legally separate. This structure complied with state laws on paper. In practice, decisions flowed from one center. The architects mattered. Rockefeller relied on Henry Flagler for strategy and Samuel Dodd for legal design. Dodd, Standard Oil's chief counsel, understood corporate law better than most legislators. He used trust agreements to bypass state restrictions on interstate ownership. New Jersey lawmakers later rewrote their corporate statutes in 1889 to accommodate this model. Other states copied New Jersey soon after. Pricing was the next lever. Standard Oil could temporarily sell kerosene below cost in targeted regions. Smaller competitors lacking capital reserves collapsed or sold out. Once absorbed, prices stabilized again. This was not chaos pricing, it was selective pressure applied with precision. The tactic was legal at the time and devastating in effect. Information control reinforced dominance. Standard Oil tracked production volumes, shipping costs, and regional demand in detail. Independent refiners operated blind by comparison. Better data allowed faster decisions and tighter margins. Efficiency was not an accident, it was engineered. Power followed clarity. Government response came slowly. The Sherman Antitrust Act passed in 1890 under President Benjamin Harrison. Enforcement was weak and inconsistent for years. Federal prosecutors lacked experience and political backing. Standard Oil continued operating largely unchanged. The system outpaced the law. When action finally arrived, it came from the judiciary. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil. Chief Justice Edward Douglas White ruled that the company violated antitrust law through unreasonable restraint of trade. Standard Oil was split into 34 separate companies. The structure was dismantled, not erased. Rockefeller's outcome surprised many. He owned shares in all successor companies. As independent firms, their combined market value rose sharply. Rockefeller became wealthier after the breakup than before it. The system adapted instead of collapsing. This was evolution, not defeat. The successors mattered. Companies like Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco traced directly back to Standard Oil fragments. Over decades, mergers and reconsolidation followed under new names. Regulation shaped behavior, but it did not reverse concentration. The blueprint proved resilient. Other industries studied the lesson. Banking adopted holding companies under laws shaped by the Federal Reserve and Congress. Telecommunications consolidated under regulatory oversight from the Federal Communications Commission. Railroads, utilities, and steel followed similar paths. Standard Oil became a reference model. This is where the pattern locks in. Breakups change ownership labels, not incentives. Legal compliance becomes a design constraint, not a barrier. Like a river redirected by levees, power finds the lowest path allowed. Rockefeller's system worked because it learned how to move inside the rules. The first leverage point sits with corporate management. Executives decide when to integrate, acquire, or exit markets. At Standard Oil, those decisions flowed from Rockefeller and his trustees. Today, similar authority rests with boards and CEOs at companies like ExxonMobil, Amazon, and Alphabet. Strategy is concentrated long before the public sees outcomes. The second leverage point is finance. Large banks provide capital, manage risk, and shape consolidation. In Rockefeller's era, institutions like J.P. Morgan and Company under John Pierpont Morgan stabilized and reorganized industrial giants. In the modern system, firms like J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and BlackRock influence which companies scale and which fail. Capital allocation becomes silent governance. Law and regulation form the third pressure point. Legislators write rules, but enforcement defines reality. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission decide when consolidation crosses a line. Historically, those agencies respond to political signals from presidents and Congress. Under Theodore Roosevelt, enforcement tightened. Under William Howard Taft, it became procedural. The fourth leverage lies in infrastructure. Control over pipelines, data centers, logistics networks, or cloud platforms determines who can compete. Standard Oil's pipelines excluded rivals from markets. Today, Amazon controls fulfillment networks, and Google controls digital traffic through search. Infrastructure quietly shapes outcomes before prices are set. Public legitimacy completes the structure. Philanthropy, research funding, and institutional partnerships shape perception. Rockefeller's foundations influenced medicine and education through universities and public health programs. In the modern era, corporate foundations and ESG initiatives serve a similar function. Influence extends beyond markets into norms. When these levers align, resistance weakens. Governments regulate but depend on the system's efficiency. Consumers benefit from lower prices and stability. Workers depend on scale for employment. Power does not need coercion when dependency is built in. Control becomes structural, not personal. History shows what happens when systems like this fracture without preparation. In the 1970s, the U.S. energy market faced disruption after the 1973 oil embargo imposed by OPEC under Saudi leadership. President Richard Nixon's administration responded with price controls. Supply tightened, shortages followed, and lines formed at gas stations. Structure mattered more than intention. Another example came with the breakup of AT&T in 1982. Under President Ronald Reagan, the Department of Justice forced the separation of the Bell system. Competition increased in telecommunications equipment and services. At the same time, coordination weakened and long-term investment slowed. The market adjusted, but not without friction. In Russia during the 1990s, rapid dismantling of state monopolies followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Under Boris Yeltsin's government, assets were privatized quickly and unevenly. Oligarchs consolidated control over energy and industry. The system broke, but power reconcentrated under fewer hands. Financial systems offer another case. In 2008, the collapse of Lehman Brothers triggered global instability. Under President George W. Bush, the U.S. Treasury and Federal Reserve intervened to prevent systemic failure. Markets froze before government action restored liquidity. Breaking trust without backstops proved dangerous. These cases show a consistent pattern. When coordination disappears faster than alternatives can form, instability follows. Prices swing, supply chains fracture, and confidence erodes. Governments step in not out of ideology but necessity. Structure fills the vacuum or chaos does. The lesson is narrow but important. Systems like Rockefeller's can be reformed, but not simply removed. When leverage points snap instead of bend, consequences spread beyond elites. Ordinary people absorb the shock first. Stability is the silent currency at risk. This matters now because energy still anchors everything else. When oil prices move, transport costs follow. Food, manufacturing, and housing respond almost immediately. Decisions made by OPEC under Saudi Arabia or by Russia under Vladimir Putin ripple through daily life. The system Rockefeller shaped still transmits those shocks. Jobs are tied to concentration as well. Large firms provide stability during downturns, but reduce alternatives during expansion. When a dominant employer restructures, entire regions feel it. In the United States, plant closures by major energy or retail firms affect thousands at once. Scale turns corporate decisions into social events. Regulation sits at the center of the tension. Governments want competition without instability. The Biden administration's antitrust efforts target technology platforms while relying on them for economic growth. European Union regulators pursue similar goals through the European Commission. The balance is fragile and ongoing. Everyday choices are shaped quietly. Where you shop, how you pay, what energy heats your home, and which services mediate your work are not random. They reflect decades of consolidation and legal design. The system delivers convenience and limits exit at the same time. That trade-off defines modern life. Rockefeller's real legacy is not a company name or a fortune. It is a method that survived its creator. It trades chaos for coordination and freedom for predictability. Governments regulate it, consumers rely on it, and competitors learn to copy it. The system does not ask for loyalty, only participation. And once built into everyday life, it rarely announces itself. If you're looking for clear, in-depth analysis of economics and geopolitics that goes beyond surface-level news, subscribe to Global Insight. Beyond the headlines.